Welcome to Crash Course, AP Human Geography Edition. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new. The core periphery model is a model that tries to explain the economic, political, and social power that's spatially distributed across the world. So it's split between dominant core regions around the world and peripheral regions, which generally have less than these dominant regions. The Peters map projection is a type of projection that maintains the area of certain areas and continents but distorts the shape. So as seen here, South America and Africa look kind of wonk. The Mercator map projection is a type of map projection that accurately portrays the direction of continents, but it distorts the area, especially near the poles. So Greenland looks ridiculous, as does Antarctica. The Fuller projection is a type of map projection that maintains shape and area. So basically all the continents are in the right shape, but it loses direction. When you fold it up, it kind of looks like a hexagonal shape. It's not really spherical, which of course we all know the Earth is round. The Goodes-Homosline Projection is a type of map projection that maintains area, so all the continents around the world, but it divides the oceans, so it messes up the distance, but it is good for showing the distribution of different land masses around the world. A final type of map projection is the Ravenstein projection, and it's one that we're really used to seeing in schools. It flattens the poles out a little bit, but it distorts the shape, area, distance, and direction. So, like all the other maps, it's not perfect because it's kind of hard to model a sphere in one direction. However, this one is probably my favorite because, well, we're just used to seeing it so often. Also, next word is scale. Scale describes the relationship of features size on map to an actual size on Earth. So generally, like 1 inch maybe represents 1 mile on a map scale, and smaller scale has larger area. So smaller scale is less zoomed in, so you can see more parts of the map, while larger scale is smaller area, so it's zoomed in. An Isoline map is a type of map that uses lines to connect points of equal values. So this is used by the National Oceanic Administration, I think, and this maps out the different temperatures across the United States, and it categorizes it using colors. Also, there's a cartogram, which is a type of map that is size equals its actual value. So in this map, it shows that India and China are disproportionately big to everything else, whatever this might be. Usually people use this to maybe show the amount of something that a country produces in proportion to the rest of the world. A dot density map is a type of map that uses dots to represent frequency. So it's kind of like a cartogram, but instead of distorting the size of a particular country, they use different dots to show density. So this is a farm density map, and obviously you can see more farms are concentrated on the eastern part of the United States. The proportional symbol map is a type of map that uses symbols and various sizes to equal value. So in this map, this is about hunting license holders in the United States. Once again, we see a concentration primarily in the eastern part, and the symbol here is like a moose head badge to show how the density is distributed across the United States. There's also a Chloropleth. This is a type of map that uses colors and shading to represent different data values. So this map uses darker colors to show more dense areas, while lighter shades to show less dense areas. The Malthus population catastrophe was a proposed idea by English economist Thomas Malthus back in the day that states that the world's rate of population growth will eventually outnumber the rate of food and supply development, leading to mass starvation. So one day, population will grow a lot faster than the food that can accustom this population, and eventually people might die because they don't have enough food. Neo-Malthusians are people who still believe Malthus's ideas. So Malthus only considered a few countries of rapid population growth. He didn't consider the advancements of technology, specifically the Green Revolution that came after him. And he also didn't think about the high population growth in lower developed countries that we still see today. Neo-Malthusians believe that the gap between population and resources are wider than expected. So there's a lot more people than food available today. and the entire world population growth will eventually exceed this food supply on an even greater scale than Malthus originally thought about. This would leave billions of people around the world hungry. Anti-Malthusians, also known as the Esther Boserup model, believe that Boserup's ideas, and it states that as populations grow, they adapt to new and more efficient ways of agriculture to meet the current demand of food. So even though population is growing a lot, people can use their ingenuity to eventually let this food match up to their population growth, and we won't have mass starvation or lack of food. So there are cornucopians who believe that we will always have enough food. The problem is just the distribution. So the reason why we have starvation in many places such as Africa is simply because of the lack of transportation and infrastructure to ship all this food into these places. We produce a lot of food. In the US, we waste like 40% of our food. So it's not we don't have food, it's the transportation networks to ship these foods are not available all the time. There are different ways to model a population. One is through a population pyramid. A population pyramid has different components. They're usually horizontal bars that represent the number of males and females, the two genders, in designated cohorts or age groups. The sum of all these age-sex cohorts or bars will equal 100%, of course. Cohorts may vary from single years to groups of years. So it might be every single year represented, or it might be different groups of years, for example, teenagers or seniors. Population pyramids also generally have different shapes. So one shape is the expansive shape. This has a broad base and narrow top, and it describes young and growing populations. You generally see this in developing countries where there are a lot of births and not many people who live to their older ages. A constrictive shape is an inverted shape of the expansive, and it tapers at the bottom. It's used to describe aging populations. There are more seniors than young people being born. You see this in generally more developed countries. A stationary shape is a rectangular shaped and equally distributed model. It generally describes countries in transition, and it describes non-growing population. Generally, the replacement rate is about the same. There are the same amount of seniors as middle-aged people as young people. The demographic transition model is a model created by Thomson that portrays population change over time. It has 5 stages. It begins with a low growth with high birth and high death rates. The natural increase rate is basically 0, and all nations have moved beyond that stage. No country is in that right now. Stage 2 is high growth with high birth rates but low death rates. So there are more resources available in a country, and this promotes a higher NIR. Stage 3 throughout history has shown that these countries generally have a decreasing growth with lower birth and death rates that promotes a moderate NIR and an increase in women's status because they're not always producing a ton of children anymore. The development of contraceptives allow for these lower birth rates. Stage 4 is low growth with very low birth and death rates, virtually 0 natural increase rates, and 0 population growth. There's a strong economy, high education for a lot of people, and of course better healthcare, helping people to not die as much. And stage 5 is fertility rates that are much, much lower than replacement levels, causing a negative NIR and an aging population. Sometimes we see this with inverted population pyramids. So here is a visual of different countries in different places and the birth, death, and population growth over these years. The epidemiologic transition model focuses on distinct health threats in each state of the DTM. So once again, there are 5 stages to go with the 5 stages of the previous model. Stage 1, pestilence and famine. So bugs really come in. They pass on infectious diseases and parasitic contamination. This contributes to lots of people dying, of course. Stage 2, less pandemics, better sanitation, health, and medicine. This allows people to live better. Regenerative diseases, however, come in stage 3. This results in an increase in chronic disorders with aging, but also a decrease in health from infectious diseases. So many of those diseases we see now, later in life, usually came because of stage 3. Stage 4, delayed degenerative. So there's lower rates of these kind of diseases, but still an increasing amount of cardiovascular diseases and cancer, generally these diseases that come with industrialization and development and changes that we make to accustom to this new society we live in. In stage 5, evolution, changes in microbes that become more drug resistant. So we even see this a little bit today, where antibiotic resistant bacteria are starting to come into our global health system. And here's a visual to sort of analyze some different countries who have gone through these medical stages in their transition. There's also a gravity model of spatial interaction. This compares two cities and the distances between them to figure out the pull or the reach or the attractability of each destination. So it states that larger places generally attract more people, so large cities, we see that to be true, and closer places generally have more attraction as well because, it's easier for people to move. And low-key, it's kind of like the physics, Newton's gravity laws. There's also Ravenstein's laws of migration. These are different laws to describe how people migrate and their habits over time. So this was created in the 19th century by Ravenstein to list the laws of migration. They state that 1, most migrants go short distances within the same nation, so intranational migration. Also, long-distance migration is usually involved with big cities, so this goes back to the gravity model. 3, rural populations are the most likely to move to urban areas because of the opportunities available there. 4, individuals are more likely to move than families. Of course, uprooting your whole family is pretty tough to do. And 5, every migration causes a counter-migration. So a counter stream of migrants will leave the city if more enter. And this is basically always true. Zelinsky's model of migration transition. This is a model that depicts change in migration patterns in society that generally results from socioeconomic transitions. So this has 4 stages. The first stage is high daily and seasonal mobility in search of food. So this is many times nomads. They migrate a lot because of food. And then stage 2, they transition to high international emigration, so leaving a certain place, and interregional migration from rural to urban. They might go to nearby cities in the same region, but a little bit farther to seek new opportunities. Stage 3, high international migration and intra-regional migration from cities to suburbs. So this is when people start expanding and seeking bigger opportunities. They might move from different west to east parts of certain continents, and they might move from different cities to suburbs or vice versa because new opportunities are arriving and they've reached that stage where they need to try these new methods. And stage 4 is basically the same as stage 3. Here is another visual of different types of migration from pre-industrial times to post-industrial times, which many countries are going through right now. Language has been a dominant factor in culture for many people, and the Indo-European language is probably the most dominant language branch group family that has come out of history. So it's the most widely used language from Europe to South Asia to Latin America. So this is like the Indian languages and all the European languages. It is a family of several hundred related languages and dialects, and as you can see here, even the language we speak today, English, and many languages that came around English all stem from this Indo-European family. Language diffusion. Agriculture and conquest theories were 2 theories that tried to explain how different languages spread across the world. So the agriculture theory said that the diffusion of this Proto-Indo-European language, the language that came right before the Indo-European languages, into Europe was through the innovation of agriculture. As people grew crops and moved more and traded, they brought these languages with them. The conquest theory showed that the diffusion of this language into Europe was through the speakers overpowering earlier inhabitants through war and technology. So the Indo-Europeans were really great like horseback riders, and they dominated a lot of different places. And when they took over, they usually forced their language on the native inhabitants. Domino Theory. This is a theory that speculates that if one country falls under communism rule, then the other countries nearby will also succumb to communism. You'll learn a lot about this in world and US history. Heartland Theory. This is a theory created by Mackinder that states that the Eurasian landmass is the center of dominance. So this is very European-centric because they feel that, well, I guess it is true that the Eurasian landmass is basically the biggest continent out of all the continents in the world, and as a result, that's what makes Eurasia the most dominant and the center of all trade and supposedly the world. The heartland describes basically Russia. Russia, of course, holds most of Eurasia together, and that's why it is many times seen as the most dominant part of Earth, and the ring of exterior continents and islands around it only serves a purpose to sort of exemplify the strength of Russia and this Eurasian continent. And the Heartland theory is kind of going against this. This was a theory created by Spikeman that countered this Heartland theory. It stated that the land around the Eurasian landmass was the key to political power. So it wasn't solely based on Russia anymore. The ring of countries and land around Russia is really what contributes to the power of the area. So Russia may not necessarily hold together all of Eurasia anymore. It's really different places around Eurasia, surrounding Russia, that is really linking political power of the world that we see today. Rank size rule. So this is a pattern of settlements in a country, such that the nth largest settlement, so whichever settlement is the next largest, is a fraction of the population of the largest settlement. So the largest city, I guess, in a certain area would be 1. And any number of cities after that only has a population that is a fragment of that. So the second largest city would be 1/2 the population of the largest settlement. World systems theory, this was created by Wallerstein, very famous. This was a capitalist theory that divides the world into 3 parts: the core, the semi-periphery, and the periphery. And these 3 structures are together linked as a social change in developing countries and developed countries in the world. It basically states that developing countries are heavily dependent on the economic change and structure in developed countries. More developed countries sort of dictate the world economy and market, and they get to decide what the world market is. This really shows that less developed countries don't have much say in the world economy because they don't have the monetary resources to stake their ideas in. The WST visual, this really shows Wallerstein's theory, and it shows that capitalism has really caused this sort of crazy loop where the periphery countries send their cheap labor and raw materials to benefit the core, who sends their high profit consumption goods, materialism, back to these other countries. Von Thunen's agricultural model. This is a model created by von Thunen during the 19th century, and it portrayed agricultural land use through rings in different cities and different places around the world. Ring 1 generally represented market gardening and dairy farming. This was closest to the central place of like a city because it reduced the likelihood of spoilage and high transportation costs. Of course, they didn't have refrigeration back then, so all the dairy had to be located fairly close to the central market. Ring 2 is forestry. It's heavy, but it's critical for certain markets, so it had to be close to market, reducing transportation costs. Ring 3 is where all the field crops are grown away from a city. It's grown further from market because you need a lot of land to grow and cultivate all these products. And also they are light, so they can travel farther cheaper. And they can also stay for a much longer period of time, of course. They're not like dairy. And Ring 4 is the most outer layer. It's the farthest from the city center, and it's usually characteristic of animal grazing and livestock. This is located furthest from the market because it's kind of like field crops. There's a need for a lot of space for pastures and fields for grazing. Von Thunen's visual. This kind of shows how all these different areas of agriculture are distributed.